My name is Diana Johnson. I'm 32 years old. And the night I took a billionaire's son by the hand in the middle of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant was the night that changed both of our lives forever. It was a Friday evening, the kind where the city feels like it's pulsing with 1,000 stories unfolding at once. Inside Kingsley's, the chandeliers spilled warm light over crystal glasses and plates that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. I had worked there for 5 years, long enough to know the rules: stay invisible, stay efficient, and never, ever, be noticed by the kind of clientele that could buy and sell the building without checking their bank accounts. I was clearing table 6 when I saw him for the first time, Lucas Montgomery, 10 years old, dressed in an immaculate navy blazer, sitting stiffly beside a man whose presence could have frozen a summer day. His father, Richard Montgomery, wasn't just wealthy, he was one of those men whose reputation traveled ahead of him like a storm cloud. Owner of Montgomery Investments. A billionaire. A widower. And a man known for turning business rivals into footnotes. Lucas's legs were locked in shiny metal braces, the kind you don't see often anymore except in rehab clinics. I noticed the way his small hands fidgeted with the edges of his napkin. His father sat straight-backed, jaw set, eyes scanning the room like he was watching for weaknesses. When the live piano began a soft melody, I didn't expect anything unusual. But then, without a word, Lucas pushed back his chair. The scrape of it against the floor was loud enough to make half the room glance over. He wobbled as he stood, his braces glinting under the lights, then looked straight at me. "Would you dance with me?" His voice was quiet, but in that hushed space, it might as well have been shouted. For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. "Sir, control your son." Manager Thornton's voice sliced through the air, sharp and condescending. "This is not a dance hall. Our employees are not here to entertain children." Richard Montgomery's jaw tightened. "Lucas, sit down." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of an order that was not meant to be disobeyed. Lucas's hand stayed in the air, trembling, not from defiance, but from effort. I could feel every eye in the restaurant on me, the kind of stares that judge, assess, and decide your fate in seconds. And then I heard my own voice say, calmly, "Mr. Thornton, I'm leaving. My shift is over." I untied my apron and set it neatly on the tray. Then I turned back to Lucas, let a smile soften my face, and took his hand. "I can't dance in an apron." Richard shot up from his seat. "What do you think you're doing?" "Accepting an invitation," I said simply. The first step Lucas took was hesitant. His foot dragged, the metal of his brace screeching faintly across the polished floor. I didn't guide him. I didn't rush him. I simply matched his pace. "She's getting fired tomorrow," I heard a woman whisper at the next table. Maybe she was right. But in that moment, Lucas's eyes shifted, fear giving way to concentration, shame melting into something rarer, pride. For the first time since the accident, I suspected, he was the one leading. When the short dance ended, I bowed slightly. "Thank you for asking me out, Lucas. It was an honor." I started to leave, but Richard's voice stopped me. "Wait." I turned. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." He nodded slowly, repeating it as if committing it to memory. Then he pulled a card from his jacket and extended it toward me. "My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. The air in the restaurant grew so still I could hear the clink of a spoon 2 tables away. I took the card, felt its embossed lettering against my fingers, and slipped it into my pocket without looking at it. As I walked away, Lucas's voice carried softly behind me. "Dad, why did you do that?" Sleep didn't come easily that night. The adrenaline of defying Manager Thornton, the echo of metal braces on polished wood, the sudden gravity of a billionaire's business card burning against the lining of my skirt, it all circled my mind in restless loops. I lay awake in my small Bronx apartment and listened to the radiator knock like it was complaining about the cold. Across the thin wall, a neighbor's TV murmured a laugh track. Somewhere down the hallway, a baby let out that soft, hiccuping cry, a reminder that the world keeps happening, even when your life is suddenly teetering on a cliff's edge. On the kitchen counter, I placed the card beneath the magnet that held up everything I never wanted to lose: Zoe's photo in her graduation cap from her community college nursing program, a flyer for our next Freedom Steps open house, a note scribbled in block letters by a 7-year-old participant that read, "Miss Diana, I can do it myself." I'd saved it for years. I liked to read it on nights when the grant rejections came in, when the landlord left notices about the elevator breaking, when I closed my eyes and saw the long hallway of hospital rooms where my sister, at 17, had decided to live. I remembered Lucas's face, pale and intent. That small, fragile hand extended into a room that had never been designed for children like him. What struck me wasn't his courage, it was his decision. The line between the two is thin, but one is about willingness and the other is about power. He had asked. He had led. I had followed. At 3 a.m., the refrigerator motor kicked on with a steady hum and finally lulled me into a dreamless blur. When my alarm rang at 7, I was already upright, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt hope. I put on my best outfit, a navy skirt and a white blouse that had seen better days and better bleach, and took the 4 train toward Midtown. I held onto the metal pole and let the rhythm of the rails ground me. In the reflection on the window, my face looked steady. I told myself steadiness would be my currency today. Montgomery Tower rose out of the street like wealth made into architecture. Glass and marble, everything so bright it seemed to reflect light back into the sky. The lobby smelled faintly of eucalyptus and money. Polished floors showed no footprints. Every surface was a mirror with good posture. A receptionist with perfect eyeliner looked up with the expression of someone who had been trained to say no with her eyebrows alone. "Diana Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery," I said. She glanced at me, then at my shoes, then at her screen. One moment. The phone conversation she had was quiet and efficient, 2 syllables and a nod, and then, 18th floor. "Ms. Winters will see you." The elevator made my stomach dip. I watched the numbers climb and wondered what "see you" meant inside a place like this. I had dealt with wealthy parents before, at schools, at donor galas for the community center, at the restaurant where I needed to keep my head down and my tray balanced. What people with power never understood is that silence isn't emptiness. Silence has texture. It's used like a tool. The doors opened onto a hallway of mirrors and muted art. Ms. Winters materialized from an office so streamlined it looked like a geometry problem. She was in her 40s, sharp bob, sharper gaze. Her suit was the kind that says if you spill coffee on me, your entire city block will file for Chapter 11. "Mr. Montgomery is in a conference call," she said. "Follow me." We walked. Past a row of glass-walled meeting rooms where people in immaculate clothes talked at screens showing graphs with lines that went forever up. Past an oil painting of a woman who looked like a storm paused mid-swoop. The heels of Ms. Winters's shoes clicked with a tempo that suggested the rest of us were behind. When we reached a small waiting room furnished with 2 tasteful chairs and a table of magazines no one read, she turned, and in the privacy of that soundproofed little cube, she let the mask tilt just enough to show human curiosity. "He had you fired, didn't he?" she asked, almost conversationally. "It happens. Powerful clients call, and people like you lose their jobs." I blinked. "People like me?" She didn't slow down, didn't flinch. "You know what I mean." "I'd like to hear you say it," I said. I wasn't mad. Just very, very awake. She adjusted her glasses, not meeting my eyes. "Employees who don't know their place." I smiled, because sometimes smiling is both a shield and a blade. "And where exactly would that be?" Her phone lit up on cue. "He'll see you now." Richard Montgomery's office felt like half a floor unto itself. It opened toward Manhattan with a wall of windows so tall the city looked scaled down and manageable, like a model he might rearrange if a bridge displeased him. He stood with his back to the door, hands in his pockets, watching the morning traffic crawl along the river. He turned when we entered, and what surprised me was not his height or his face, both were exactly what the news photos made them, but his control. It was practiced. It was tight. It was the kind of control that says, "You will tell me everything without me ever having to ask." "Mr. Montgomery," I said, formal out of habit and survival. "Miss Johnson," he replied. "Please." We sat. He did not. He let silence stretch between us until it became a thing with its own spine. I recognized that tactic and decided not to feed it. Let the silence be his. "Do you have a background?" he asked finally. "Excuse me?" "Education." "Bachelor's in Child Development from NYU," I said, meeting his gaze. "Incomplete Master's in Special Education." A flicker, surprise, irritation, I couldn't tell. He moved to the table by the window and picked up a thin folder. My name was on the tab. He opened it, and there was my life, distilled into paper, photos of grinning kids at our summer showcase, a copy of a city grant we had almost won, a screenshot of the Freedom Steps website where Zoe and I had written the mission statement at 3 in the morning and thought the world might read it. "You work as a waitress," he said, not quite a question. "I work 3 jobs," I corrected. "The restaurant. A bookstore on weekends. Tutoring when a family can pay." I let a breath steady me. "Freedom Steps doesn't pay the rent." He set the folder down, and when he spoke again, the words stumbled just enough to reveal what lay beneath the marble, something like a bruise. "I did some research. I wanted to know who the person was who danced with my son." I pictured Lucas's face again. How concentration had replaced fear. I didn't smile at the memory, I let it warm me from the inside out. "We co-founded Freedom Steps 6 years ago," I said. "A dance-based motor rehabilitation program for children with physical disabilities. My sister, Zoe, and I. Which is now about to close," he said, glancing at a page, "due to lack of funding." I nodded. "Yes." He looked at me then, fully looked. It would have been easy to feel small in that gaze, but I thought of the first time a child let go of my wrists and found their own balance. I thought of how joy shows up as courage. "I want you to work for me," he said. It's funny how certain sentences can make the temperature of a room change. That one lowered it by 10 degrees. I heard the soft buzz of the HVAC for the first time, felt the rush of air against my ankles, smelled a faint, expensive cologne that had been designed to suggest effortless and winning. "As a waitress in your house?" I asked. Not to be clever. To be clear. His face hardened. "As a therapeutic companion for Lucas." He said his son's name like it cost him something to let it out. His gaze flicked toward a framed photograph on the desk, a woman with kind eyes holding a baby who had his father's mouth. I knew who she was before I knew her name. You can spot the dead in pictures, the way they look like they're still moving. "I have the best specialists," he continued. "Physical therapists. Neurologists. Psychologists. But what you did at the restaurant." "It was just a dance," I said softly. It was the first time I've seen him smile since the accident. His voice caught on the word accident. "I don't want a dancer for my son, Miss Johnson. I want someone who can do what you did." He swallowed, and when he said the next word, it sounded foreign on his tongue. "Follow." I stood up before my resolve had time to ask for backup. "No." He blinked, genuinely startled, like the world he knew had hiccuped. "No? I don't work for people who see my color or my social class before they see my competence," I said, my voice even. "And I don't work for people who try to buy their way around emotional truth." A flush rose along his collar. You're turning down an offer that would solve your financial problems out of pride? Out of dignity, I said. And because your son deserves more than someone hired to pretend to care. I took a step toward the door, then stopped, not for drama, but because I have learned when to leave a door ajar. Lucas doesn't need more experts. He needs space to lead his own life. You don't know my son, he said, and I heard steel under the words, the sting of a man accustomed to his opinions being the end of all arguments. No, I agreed. But I know people like him. People whose physical limitations are nothing compared to the invisible cages we build around them. I reached into my purse and pulled out a simple card, white, our logo in 2 colors because that was cheaper to print than 3, our mission statement in 8 words, your rhythm. Your rules. Every move counts. I placed it on his table. Freedom Steps classes are Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4. If you'd like to bring Lucas, the first class is free. His eyes fell to the card as if it were a scrap of paper torn from a different universe. I turned and walked out. The hallway seemed longer than before, as if the building had rearranged itself to test my resolve. Ms. Winters was just outside, pretending not to be hovering. Her expression was a strange cocktail, curiosity, alarm, the faintest note of respect hidden like a drop of lemon in a glass of water. You just turned down an offer from Richard Montgomery, she said in a whisper that wasn't a whisper. Are you crazy? Maybe, I said. But I'd rather be crazy than be property. I made it to the elevator without my hands shaking. Only when the doors closed did the tremor come, running up my arms and into my chest like a storm I'd kept just outside the windows. In the lobby, I stepped into the cold and let the city slap color back into my face. The wind had the smell of the river in it. I walked 3 blocks without remembering my feet. By the time I climbed the stairs to the community center, the bell over the door was chiming its familiar, tinny hello, and Zoe was yelling from the studio, "D. Tell me you brought coffee." I held up a paper bag like a trophy. And bagels. She came barreling into the lobby, hijab askew, eyes bright with the light of 3 hours of sleep and an indestructible spirit. Bless you. You look like you arm-wrestled capitalism and won on points. I met him, I said. She froze. Him. And? He offered me a job. Zoe's eyebrows shot up past the city's noise threshold. As what? His conscience? As Lucas's therapeutic companion. Oh. She studied my face, reading everything the way only sisters can. You said no. I said no. She exhaled, relief folding into pride. Good. Also, I added, and now the absurdity of it made me laugh, I invited him to class. Wait, him. She pressed a hand to her chest like she'd just seen a fireworks finale. You're either a genius or we're moving to Jersey. We worked the rest of that day like we always did, answering emails from parents asking if their child could bring a cousin, wrangling a donation of second-hand balance bars, adjusting the schedule so Dr. Mercer could visit next week when she was back in the city, patching a tear in the Marley floor with tape and love. The studio smelled faintly of sweat and lemon cleaner. The sun moved across the high windows in a steady, reliable arc, and the hour before class, the quiet hour when chaos has not yet been invited in, was as holy as any ritual I know. Children arrived. Wheels and braces and crutches, little hands tugging at jackets, teenagers rolling their eyes and then breaking into grins when their friends came through the door. Parents settled onto the benches with their coffee cups and their infinite, aching hope. I wove through the noise and the questions and the comfortable sameness of our Tuesdays, and every time the bell jingled, a part of me glanced up to see if wealth had decided to enter humility's domain. He didn't come that first day. Or the second. I didn't expect him to. Men like Richard rarely come to places like ours until they can do it with a camera following them. They prefer controlled environments, rooms where the ceiling height and the lighting temperature and the trajectory of the conversation are planned in advance. Our studio was not controllable. That was the point. On Wednesday morning, I arrived early to cut strips of new tape for the floor. I kept my hands busy because my thoughts were loud. A grant application sat open on my laptop, a long shot with a deadline I could count down on one hand. The rent was due in 11 days. Our waiting list had grown long enough to make me wince when I opened the spreadsheet. I stood in the middle of the room and let the kind of question rise that I often pushed down: how much of my life is stubbornness and how much is calling? The difference, sometimes, is a splinter you can't find. I was at the reception desk when Zoe came skidding down the hallway, breathless and wide-eyed. "There's a Bentley parked outside," she announced, eyes crinkling with the glee of a surprise. "And you won't believe who's inside." I didn't look. Not yet. I counted my breaths. I counted to 5, because that's how long it takes me to shed defensiveness and pick up dignity. Then I turned. The car's paint was so black it reflected the world like a glossy lie. In the back seat, through the tinted window, I could make out a small silhouette craning forward: Lucas, his face bright with the particular nervousness that comes from wanting very badly to do something you're not sure you're allowed to do. The driver's door stayed closed. And then, as if two battles had resolved at once, the front door opened. Richard Montgomery stepped onto our cracked curb wearing jeans and a sweater that had cost more than our monthly utilities and did nothing to make him look less like a man who told rooms what to be. He wasn't disguised. He didn't wear shades or a cap. He stood there, looking at our peeling paint and the hand-drawn poster on the door that read "Your rhythm. Your rules. Every move counts," and I watched a thought cross his face. It wasn't contempt. It wasn't pity. It was a calculation dropping something from its formula. "You were right," Zoe whispered next to me. "Men like him don't come to places like this." "Don't underestimate the power of a determined son," I said, though the words felt less like a lesson and more like a prayer. The back door opened. Lucas climbed out slowly, adjusting the straps of his braces with practiced hands. He looked up at his father. Richard nodded. The gesture was small and stiff, a man unlearning something in real time. I stepped forward, the bell chimed, the sunlight shifted, and in the quiet that followed, I felt the balance change, only slightly, like the first time a child lets go and doesn't fall. I held the door. "Welcome," I said. "You're right on time." Richard's eyes flicked around the lobby, at the cork board layered with flyers and index cards and gratitude notes, at the photo wall where dozens of faces smiled with progress that didn't fit into charts, at the scuffed floor that had learned 100 different ways to say triumph. He stood very still and then gave a single, formal nod that would have looked ridiculous anywhere else but here felt like a bow. Lucas's gaze found mine. In it, I saw the same stubborn spark I recognized in the mirror. He looked past me into the studio where kids were already circling up, music low, laughter higher. "Can I?" he started. "You can," I said. "And you will lead." He grinned, teeth bright, uncertainty shrinking under the warmth of possibility. He took a breath and crossed the threshold as if stepping from one universe to another. Behind him, Richard lingered in the doorway like a man staring at an unfamiliar ocean. He didn't ask questions. He didn't give orders. He just watched his son go. "That one," Zoe murmured near my ear, "is going to learn something today." "Both of them are," I said. And I meant it. Inside the studio, the music lifted, the circle widened to make space, and I watched Lucas take his place not at the edge, but in the middle, because sometimes the shortest distance between two worlds is the width of a doorway and the courage to step through it. I turned back to the lobby to find Richard still on the threshold, his hand resting against the door jamb like he needed the touch of something solid. He glanced at me, and I saw a crack appear in the careful shell of composure. "How does this work?" he asked. The question was stripped of its armor. Simple. Human. "You sit," I said gently, nodding toward the row of chairs by the window where the parents lined up like a quiet chorus. "You watch. You don't interfere. You let him lead. And if you feel anything, anything at all, you don't apologize for it. He held my gaze a moment longer, then walked to the chairs. He sat. He placed his hands on his knees like a man preparing for turbulence. In the studio, the children shifted into the first exercise. The music rose. The day began. And the world, tilt by tilt, started to turn. The hum of the studio filled the air, wooden floor creaks, the muffled thud of sneakers, the soft whir of wheelchair wheels tracing arcs on the marley. It was a sound that didn't exist anywhere else in the city. A sound that was neither the chaos of the streets nor the hushed formality of corporate boardrooms. I stepped onto the floor, the music already pulling the children into its rhythm. Lucas stood near the center, his braces glinting under the overhead lights, eyes darting from one child to another as if taking mental notes. His movements were tentative at first, a shuffle forward, a half-turn, but he was watching the others, absorbing the idea that there were no wrong steps here. Richard sat stiffly against the back wall, arms crossed, posture straight as though even the chair was beneath him. His eyes never left his son, but the expression was the same one he probably wore in an investor meeting, critical, measuring, unwilling to betray what he felt. I clapped my hands to signal a change in the exercise. All right, partners. The kids moved instinctively toward one another. I made sure Lucas was paired with Maya, a girl his age who used a wheelchair. She had a streak of purple in her hair and the kind of confidence that could fill a room. You lead first, she said to him. Lucas hesitated, his gaze flickering toward his father. Richard didn't move, but I caught the faintest tightening of his jaw. That was all it took for Lucas to look away and focus on Maya. He took a deep breath and pushed forward, guiding her through a slow pivot. Maya followed without question. They were imperfect in the most perfect way, Lucas's steps uneven but intentional, Maya's wheels turning with a precision that made up for his instability. By the second turn, his mouth had relaxed into something dangerously close to a smile. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Richard lean forward slightly. I walked toward him, keeping my voice low. We call this a leadership pass. They take turns deciding where to go. It's about choice, not correction. He didn't look at me. And what if he chooses wrong? I smiled. There's no wrong if the partner follows. Something in his expression flickered, but it was gone before I could read it. We moved into group formations. I watched Lucas get bolder, guiding Maya into a figure eight and laughing when they almost collided with another pair. His laugh was light, unguarded, the kind you can't fake. When the session ended, the kids clustered near the benches, chattering about the next class. Parents gathered coats and bags. Richard remained seated until Lucas limped over to him, flushed and breathing hard but visibly proud. Did you see that turn I did? Lucas asked. Richard nodded. I saw. The words were short, but they carried a weight Lucas seemed to recognize. I walked over. You did more than a turn, I told him. You led the whole sequence. Lucas grinned. Can I come back? Richard's gaze flicked between us. We'll see, he said. I'd heard those two words before, from parents who didn't mean them. But something about the way Richard said it told me the decision was already turning in his mind. As they left, Zoe appeared beside me. That man looked like he was trying not to be impressed, she whispered. Trying and failing, I replied. 2 days later, the Bentley returned. This time, Richard didn't linger outside. He walked in with Lucas, scanning the lobby like he was still expecting to find a flaw big enough to justify leaving. When he didn't, he sat in the same chair as before, his posture a little less rigid. Midway through class, I noticed him watching, not just Lucas, but the other kids too. His gaze followed a boy with a prosthetic leg who was building a complex rhythm with his partner. It lingered on a teenage girl with cerebral palsy who was inventing her own spin pattern. After class, he approached me. You said this isn't therapy. It's not, I agreed. Then what is it? Freedom, I said simply. Structured freedom. The kind where they decide how to move, not us. He studied me for a long moment. And that works? I tilted my head toward Lucas, who was showing Maya how to do the figure eight he'd learned. What do you think? Richard didn't answer. But he came back again the following week. And the week after that. On the fourth visit, the air in the studio shifted before I even turned around. Dr. Mercer, Zoe whispered in my ear. I looked toward the door and saw her, elegant gray braids, an ornate cane, and the presence of someone who had been listened to in rooms full of people who didn't want to hear her. Mr. Montgomery, she greeted him like an old acquaintance. His eyes narrowed. You've been trying to get my foundation to fund your research. She smiled, unbothered. 3 times, to be exact. And you rejected us each time. I had my reasons, he said. Yes, she replied. You didn't understand it. Richard's gaze slid toward me. And you? I co-authored those proposals, I said. Understanding dawned across his features, slow but sharp. You knew who I was that night at the restaurant. I did. Was the dance staged? No. Lucas chose it. I chose to follow. Dr. Mercer stepped closer. We're studying how non-directive movement affects brain plasticity in children with motor challenges. This program is a pilot for that research. He frowned. And you work as a waitress because you rejected our funding, I said evenly. And bills don't pay themselves. Before he could respond, Zoe's voice cut in from across the room. Diana, press. A small group of reporters was filing in, cameras already out. Richard stiffened, the tension in him returning like a tide. What is this? He demanded. I met his gaze. Part 2 of the plan. The arrival of the reporters was like a sudden shift in weather, heat and static rushing into the room. Conversations quieted. The rhythm of the class faltered for a beat before Zoe, bless her, cranked the music up a notch and clapped her hands to keep the kids moving. Richard's gaze snapped to me, sharp and cold. You invited the press here? I invited them to witness something worth documenting, I said. My tone was calm, deliberate. If I gave him even a flicker of defensiveness, he'd pounce. You used my son for a publicity stunt? His voice was low, but it carried an edge sharp enough to slice the air between us. No, I said, meeting his stare. I gave him an opportunity to show the world what's possible when we stop treating children like broken machines. Dr. Mercer stepped in before he could respond. We released preliminary findings today. The program's showing measurable progress in motor autonomy, faster than traditional therapy models. The press wanted to see the methodology in action. Richard's eyes narrowed. And you thought ambushing me in front of cameras was the way to win my support? I gestured toward the center of the room, where Lucas was laughing as he tried to mimic a spin another boy had invented. You think this is about winning your support? It's about showing what you've been saying no to for 3 years. He took a step closer, his height casting a deliberate shadow. You orchestrated this. I didn't flinch. I recognized an opening. And I took it. 4 months ago, I continued, my voice steady, when you canceled our meeting without reading the proposal, I promised myself I'd find a way to put this program in front of you, and keep it there until you couldn't ignore it. His jaw worked, but before he could speak, Zoe called out again. Diana, it's Lucas. We both turned. The music had stopped. In the middle of the room, Lucas stood surrounded by a loose circle of kids and parents. One of his braces lay on the floor beside him. He gripped a balance bar with one hand, his other arm extended slightly for counterweight. Lucas, Richard began, already moving forward. I stepped in front of him. Wait. Are you insane? Watch. Lucas's face was a study in focus, brows drawn, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed on a point just ahead. Slowly, shakily, he shifted his weight onto his weaker leg. His free foot lifted, hovered, then came down in a small, decisive step forward. The room exhaled as one. Applause broke out. Cameras flashed. Someone let out a whoop that made Lucas's grin break wide open. Richard's hands dropped to his sides. For a long moment, the billionaire's composure cracked. His eyes glistened, and he didn't bother to hide it. "That," I said softly, "is why Freedom Steps exists. It's not about perfect steps, it's about first steps taken on your own." He looked at me, and for the first time since we'd met, there was no challenge in his gaze. Only something that looked dangerously like humility. "This could have been done without manipulating me," he said finally. "It could have, if you'd answered our calls. If you'd read the proposals." He didn't argue. Instead, his attention went back to Lucas, who was now showing Maya how he'd managed the step without the brace. The press had noticed Richard by then, lenses turning toward him. "Mr. Montgomery," a reporter called out. "Is it true your foundation rejected funding for this program 3 times? He glanced at me, then at Lucas. For the briefest second, I saw the decision balancing in his mind, retreat into anger, or lean into the moment his son had just created. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the room. "You know what's hardest for someone in my position?" He paused, letting the cameras lock on him. "Admitting when we're wrong." The room went silent, except for the clicking of shutters. "The Montgomery Foundation will fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years, he said, and build a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Johnson. Gasps, applause, and Zoe's shocked laugh filled the air. But Richard wasn't done. "On one condition," he added, looking straight at me. "Ms. Johnson retains complete autonomy over the program. No corporate interference." I felt something shift deep in my chest. Not victory. Not relief. Something else, an awareness that this was just the beginning. 3 months later, bulldozers were clearing the lot for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. It wasn't the most expensive project the Montgomery Foundation had ever backed, but every brick, every ramp, every open floor space was designed with direct input from the kids and their families. I was there almost daily, clipboard in hand, hard hat on, arguing with contractors about accessibility details they'd never considered before. Lucas came often too, sometimes alone, sometimes with other kids from the program. And, to my surprise, so did Richard. One afternoon, he showed up in a tailored suit, sleeves rolled up, reading over a stack of scientific articles marked with post-it notes. "I never thought I'd have to study neuroplasticity at 50, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. "I never thought I'd see you in a community center," I said. He smirked. Guess we're both full of surprises. We walked the perimeter together, discussing construction updates. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Why have you never accepted my apology?" "Because you've never given one," I said. "You funded our program, changed policies, redirected resources. That's compensation. An apology is different." He nodded slowly, as if filing that away. 6 months later, the center's grand opening was a sea of kids, parents, reporters, and city officials. Lucas, now using only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements weren't perfect, but they were confident, deliberate, his. Richard stood off to the side, watching with an expression I'd come to recognize, the look of someone who finally understood the difference between holding on and simply being present. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," I said quietly beside him. "No," Richard agreed. "But he still needs me to be around." Crucial difference. A reporter stepped forward. "Mr. Montgomery, what's been the biggest lesson you've learned from this journey?" He looked at Lucas, then straight into the camera. That true leaders aren't the ones who decide the path for others, but the ones who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way. I glanced at him, surprised. For once, I didn't think he was performing for the cameras. 1 year later, the Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center didn't just stand, it breathed. The polished hardwood floors had already worn in spots where wheels, braces, and bare feet had carved paths into them. The walls were lined with new photos, grins, first steps, twirls that defied the predictions of specialists who'd once said never. And at the center of it all, Lucas. He had changed more in 12 months than I could have imagined. He still used his lightweight brace on difficult days, but his gait was steady, confident. He had taken to visiting the center outside of his own practice sessions, sitting with younger kids, helping them find balance, showing them tricks he'd learned. He spoke at our open house events, telling parents and children, "Don't let anyone tell you how far you can go, only you know that." The first time I heard him say that, I glanced at Richard, expecting his usual composed half-smile. Instead, I caught something else entirely, a flicker of pride tangled with a kind of awe. It was the look of a man who was starting to understand he was no longer his son's primary guide. The expansion came faster than we anticipated. With Montgomery Foundation funding, we opened branches in Boston and Chicago. I traveled constantly those first few months, working with local teams, adapting spaces to the needs of the kids in those cities. One evening, back at the Manhattan Center, I found Richard sitting in the lobby long after the last class had ended. He had a file open in front of him, pages covered with charts and notes in his own handwriting. "Long day?" I asked, setting my bag down. "Long month," he admitted. "The expansion is working, but there's something else." He turned the file toward me. Inside were photos, kids I'd never met, using our methods in hospital rehab units overseas. "I didn't authorize any of this," he said. "It's spreading on its own." I flipped through the images. In each one, I recognized the hallmarks, the open spaces, the absence of rigid instruction, the pairs of kids deciding their own steps. Freedom Steps had escaped us, and in the best possible way. "This isn't a problem," I said. "It could be," he countered. "If it's done wrong." I studied him for a moment. "You're talking like someone who actually cares about the integrity of the work." His gaze met mine. "I do." The twist came on a Thursday afternoon. Lucas had been practicing a solo routine for weeks, something he wanted to perform at the anniversary gala. The choreography was entirely his, he'd designed it with Maya, blending her wheelchair spins with his footwork. Halfway through rehearsal, he stopped suddenly, wincing. I was at his side in seconds. "What happened?" "Just felt weird," he said, shaking his leg out. Richard was there a heartbeat later, eyes sharp. "We're getting it checked now." An MRI confirmed it, a stress fracture, likely from overtraining. He'd have to rest for 6 weeks, which meant no gala performance. Lucas took the news quietly, too quietly. That night, I called Richard. "We need to talk about him." He didn't argue. He showed up at my apartment the next morning, looking like he'd barely slept. "He's retreating," I said. "Not physically. Mentally. He thinks he's let you down." Richard exhaled slowly, the weight of it pulling his shoulders forward. "That's on me." "It's on both of us," I replied. "So we fix it together." At the gala, instead of performing, Lucas took the stage to speak. The lights caught the silver of his brace, but his voice was steady. "I was supposed to dance tonight," he said, "but something better happened. I learned that leading isn't about being in front. It's about showing people they can keep going, even if you have to step aside for a while." In the audience, Richard's eyes shone. And for the first time, I think I saw him realize that Lucas didn't just inherit his determination, he'd surpassed it. After the gala, when the crowd had thinned, Richard approached me. "You know," he said, when I first met you, I thought you were inconvenient. I laughed. I still am. His smile was small but real. And exactly what we needed. It wasn't an apology. But this time, it didn't need to be. Lucas's stress fracture became a turning point in ways none of us expected. At first, he was restless, watching classes from the bench, tapping rhythms with his hands, impatient to get back on the floor. I could see it in the way his eyes followed every movement. His body might have been on pause, but his mind was running laps. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into his recovery, I caught him sketching in a notebook while the other kids practiced. The page was filled with stick figures, some in wheelchairs, some with crutches, mapped out in neat formations. Lines and arrows showed where each person should move next. "What's this?" I asked, leaning over. "My routine," he said matter-of-factly. "For them." "For them?" He pointed toward the younger group. "They're ready to try leading. But they don't know how yet." It hit me then, he was shifting roles. Not a participant, not just a peer leader, but something closer to a teacher. The following week, we gave him a shot. I introduced him to the class. "Today, your leader is Lucas." His face went pale for a second, but then he stood, balancing on his good leg and cane. He explained the formation, demonstrated the moves, then watched as the others followed. He didn't correct them in the harsh, mechanical way so many experts did, he adapted to what each person could do. By the end of the session, the room was buzzing. When Richard arrived to pick him up, he froze in the doorway, watching his son command the space with a quiet authority that didn't come from a title or wealth, it came from having lived the struggle. On the ride home, Lucas told him, "When I can't dance, I can still make others dance." Richard later told me that line rattled around in his head for days. That same month, I was invited to present Freedom Steps at an international rehabilitation conference in Geneva. I almost turned it down, the center needed me, and I didn't want to leave Zoe juggling everything alone. But when I mentioned it to Richard, he didn't hesitate. "You have to go," he said. "I'll cover logistics here. Staff, funding, whatever you need." I raised an eyebrow. "You? Running things without trying to take over?" "Try me," he said, and for the first time, I believed him. While I was in Switzerland, Lucas took over more leadership in the youth classes. Richard attended every session, not sitting on the sidelines but helping set up equipment, talking to parents, listening to their stories. It was Zoe who called me overseas one night, her voice hushed but electric. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Richard told a parent today, your child doesn't need to prove anything to me. I'm here to follow their lead." I almost dropped the phone. When I returned 2 weeks later, the center felt different. Not just bigger, stronger. There was an ease between Richard and the families now. He still had his formality, but it no longer served as a wall, it was more like a coat he could take off when he wanted. That Friday, after the last class ended, he asked if we could talk. We sat in my office, the low hum of the air conditioner filling the space. "I've been approached by a developer," he began. "They want to buy the lot next to the center. Turn it into luxury condos." "And?" I asked, already bracing for the old Richard, the one who calculated everything in terms of profit. "I said no," he replied simply. "Instead, I offered to buy it myself." I blinked. "For what?" "For an outdoor adaptive recreation space. Year-round, fully accessible." I stared at him. "You mean, expand Freedom Steps into something more than just a building?" He nodded. Lucas asked why his friends can dance here but can't play ball outside without hitting stairs, curbs, and gates. I realized, he's right. The way he said it, "he's right," was the true revelation. Richard Montgomery had gone from a man who dismissed what he didn't understand to one who could admit when someone else saw the path better than he did. And it wasn't just Lucas he was learning to follow. Richard's decision to buy the lot next to the center sent ripples far beyond our walls. Within a week, the backlash started. Not from the community, our families were thrilled, but from Richard's own circle. Partners. Investors. Board members at Montgomery Investments who saw adaptive recreation as a distraction from serious ventures. The first shot came in the form of a terse email forwarded to me by Zoe. Montgomery is making sentimental decisions. This is a poor allocation of resources and will damage the brand. I could imagine the boardroom conversations, measured voices, expensive suits, the same men who had once praised Richard for his ruthless efficiency, now questioning whether he'd lost his edge. Richard didn't bring it up with me at first, but I saw it in the set of his jaw during our planning meetings. He was still coming to the center, still working with Lucas and the kids, but there was a tension coiled inside him like a spring. It came to a head one Tuesday morning. I walked into the lobby to find Richard pacing, phone in hand. His voice was low but sharp. "No," he said. "I'm not pulling the offer. If the board wants to call an emergency session, fine. I'll be there." He hung up, exhaling hard. "They're threatening to block the acquisition. What happens if they succeed?" I asked. He hesitated. "The lot goes to the developer. And Freedom Steps loses the chance to expand." There it was, the old world pressing against the new one. "You knew they'd push back," I said. "I thought they'd respect my discretion," he replied. "But they see this as frivolous." I stepped closer. "So which matters more, your reputation with them, or what Lucas just taught you about following?" He didn't answer, but the muscle in his cheek twitched. That Friday, the emergency board meeting was held in the top-floor conference room of Montgomery Tower. I went, not because I was invited, but because Richard asked me to be there. The room was as I imagined, a long glass table, skyline views, a dozen pairs of eyes trained on Richard like he was under a microscope. The discussion started civil, but it didn't take long for the condescension to surface. "This is a misuse of capital," one board member said. "Your personal, charity projects, should not come at the expense of corporate priorities." Richard sat back, letting them talk. For 10 minutes, they listed all the reasons his decision was reckless, sentimental, unwise. Then he leaned forward. "You're right," he said. The room went still. "It is sentimental. And it's the smartest decision I've made in years." A ripple of murmurs. Someone scoffed. He continued. "Montgomery Investments will survive without another condo tower. But this," he gestured toward me. "This program has already changed lives, including my son's. If that damages the brand, then the brand needs to change." The silence that followed was heavier than the opening night at Kingsley's when Lucas first asked me to dance. By the time we left, the board hadn't voted. They'd tabled the decision for further review. It was a delay tactic. Richard knew it. I knew it. But as we stepped into the elevator, he looked more alive than I'd seen him in weeks. "They're scared," he said. "Of you?" I asked. "Of the fact that they can't control this. That they can't put it in a quarterly report." That night, Lucas heard about the meeting. He didn't say much at first, just listened. Then he looked at his father and said, "If they take it, we'll find another way." "Right?" Richard nodded slowly. "Right." But I could see it, the resolve hardening in him. The man who once measured everything in profit margins now had a new metric, what it would cost to walk away from the right fight. The board didn't wait long to make its move. 3 days after that tense meeting, Richard called me early in the morning. His voice was clipped, almost surgical. "They've leaked it." I didn't have to ask what he meant. By the time I turned on my laptop, the headlines were already circulating across the business and local news feeds. Montgomery Investments faces internal rift over CEO's sentimental land purchase. Billionaire risks stakeholder confidence for unusual community project. The tone varied from skeptical to outright mocking. Some articles framed it as a midlife crisis. Others as a distraction from real corporate work. I scrolled through one piece that quoted an anonymous board member. Richard Montgomery's recent behavior suggests a departure from the disciplined leadership style that built his empire. Prioritizing recreational spaces for disabled youth over high-value real estate returns is not in the company's best interest. I felt my jaw tighten. Recreational spaces for disabled youth. As if it were a hobby. When I got to the center that morning, Zoe met me at the door, phone in hand. The press wants a comment. They've been calling all morning. I've been dodging. They'll get one, I said. But not yet. Richard arrived an hour later, looking like a man who hadn't slept. He walked straight into my office without waiting for me to invite him. I have until Friday, he said. They're forcing a vote to block the acquisition. If they succeed, the lot goes to the developer within the month. What happens if you fight it and lose? I could lose my position, he said plainly. They'd frame it as a breach of fiduciary duty. I studied him for a long moment. And are you prepared for that? He didn't answer right away. Before Lucas, before you. I would have called this a waste of time. Now I know better. But knowing better doesn't make the choice any easier. By Wednesday, the media frenzy had grown teeth. A local news crew showed up outside the center, filming kids arriving for class. Parents shielded their children's faces from the cameras. One reporter called out to me as I walked in. Ms. Johnson, is it true you've been influencing Mr. Montgomery's business decisions? I didn't stop walking. If by influencing you mean convincing him children deserve a place to belong, then yes. The clip made the evening news. Richard texted me later, you just made my enemies hate you as much as they hate me. Well done. Thursday night, he asked me to meet him at Montgomery Tower. When I arrived, he was in his office, staring out at the city lights. I've decided, he said. If they want to make this a referendum on my leadership, fine. But they'll have to do it publicly. You're going to the press. I'm going to tell the truth. Not the corporate version. The real one. I raised an eyebrow. And the real one is? That my son taught me something the board never could, how to follow. Friday morning, the vote began. The board members assembled, each with their tablets and polite facades. Before they could start, Richard requested the floor. Cameras from the in-house media team rolled. I built this company by seeing potential where others saw risk, he began. And I'll continue to do that. But if my legacy is measured only in dollars and towers, then it's incomplete. The lot next to Freedom Steps is more than land. It's a space for kids who've been told their whole lives what they can't do. It's a place where they lead. One board member interrupted. With respect, Richard, this is not a charitable foundation. It's a corporation with obligations to. He held up a hand. Obligations to what? Shareholder returns? We can meet those and still honor something greater. His gaze swept the table. I won't trade that land for condos. If that costs me my position, so be it. The vote was close, closer than either of us expected. By a margin of one, the acquisition was approved. When he stepped out of that boardroom, the tension in his shoulders was gone. You won, I said. We won, he corrected. Then, almost as an afterthought, now we build it right. The lot next to the center looked nothing like the vision Richard had in mind the day the board approved its purchase. It was a cracked stretch of asphalt, overgrown in places with stubborn weeds, flanked by chain-link fencing that rattled when the wind caught it. To most people, it was just another piece of forgotten urban real estate. To Richard, it was potential. The day the demolition crew began tearing out the old surface, he brought Lucas to watch. They stood side by side, hard hats on, the sound of jackhammers echoing off the buildings. Lucas squinted at the dust clouds and smiled. "Looks like it's falling apart," he said. "It is," Richard replied. "That's how you start building something better." The design meetings became their own kind of dance. Richard insisted on being at every session, but he didn't dominate them. Instead, he listened, to architects, to accessibility experts, to the kids themselves. One afternoon, we gathered a group of the older students in the studio and asked them what they wanted in the outdoor space. A boy with a prosthetic arm said, "We need a basketball court with no steps anywhere." A girl in a motorized wheelchair added, "And a garden where we can actually reach the plants." Lucas, without hesitation, said, "A stage." Richard turned to him. "For dancing?" "For anything," Lucas said. "Music. Plays. Speeches. It should be for everyone, not just us." Richard wrote it down without comment, but I noticed the way his pen slowed over the words. By mid-spring, the site had transformed. Smooth, wide pathways curved through the space, leading to an open court with adjustable nets, a sensory garden filled with raised beds, and a stage with a ramp wide enough for 3 wheelchairs side by side. The first time I saw it completed, I felt something catch in my throat. This wasn't charity. It wasn't even just community service. It was a living rebuttal to every "not worth the investment" argument I'd heard in my life. The opening day was a celebration that felt bigger than anything the center had hosted before. Families arrived in waves, kids testing the court and running their hands along the garden edges. The stage was decorated with banners that read "Your rhythm. Your rules. Every move counts." Lucas was the first to step onto it. He wasn't performing, he was welcoming people, his voice confident, no trace of the boy who had once hesitated to take a single dance step. Richard stood in the wings, hands in his pockets, watching his son own the space. When Lucas finished speaking and the applause washed over him, he turned to his father with a grin that made the entire fight worth it. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left and the lights on the stage glowed warm against the night, Richard found me by the garden. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on Lucas, who was showing a younger boy how to roll up onto the stage ramp. "I owe you something," he said finally. I glanced at him. "You've already given more than enough." "Not that." He turned to face me fully. "An apology." For a moment, the background noise, the laughter, the bouncing of a basketball, seemed to fade. "I was wrong about you," he continued. "About this. About thinking money could solve everything. I'm sorry for how I treated you at the start." I held his gaze. "Thank you. That means more than you think." It wasn't a grand gesture, no cameras, no audience. Just a billionaire and a waitress turned director standing in the middle of something they'd built together, finally speaking on equal ground. And for the first time since that night at Kingsley's, I felt like the balance between us was exactly where it needed to be. By summer, Lucas had become more than the face of Freedom Steps, he was its voice. Parents who visited for the first time often ended up talking to him longer than they spoke to me or Zoe. He had a way of breaking things down without the sugarcoating adults used. One Saturday afternoon, a family came in with a shy little girl named Nia who had cerebral palsy. She clung to her mother, unwilling to join the group. Lucas knelt beside her, his own brace visible under his shorts. "I used to be scared too," he told her. "But then I realized no one here wants me to be perfect, they just want me to be me." By the end of class, Nia was on the floor, laughing as she spun in a slow circle with another child. Richard, standing at the back, caught my eye. There was pride there, yes, but also something heavier. That night, after the center had emptied out, Richard lingered in my office. "I've been offered a position overseas," he said. I froze. "Overseas?" A 2-year contract to restructure a failing branch of Montgomery Investments in Singapore. They want me to take it. I leaned back in my chair. And do you want to? He hesitated. The old me would have jumped at it. The new me, his gaze drifted toward the hallway where the photos of the kids hung. I'm not sure I can walk away from this. The next few weeks felt like a countdown neither of us acknowledged out loud. Richard kept showing up at the center, helping with programs, attending staff meetings. Lucas didn't know about the offer yet, and I suspected Richard was waiting for the right moment, or avoiding it altogether. One evening, I found him watching Lucas lead a workshop for visiting teens from the Chicago branch. He didn't look like a CEO weighing a career decision, he looked like a father memorizing his son in his element. If I leave, he said quietly, I'll miss years I can't get back. And if you stay? I asked. He smiled faintly. I'll have to face a board that already thinks I've gone soft. The decision came sooner than either of us expected. One Monday morning, he walked into the center with a letter in his hand. I turned it down, he said. The board's not happy, but, he glanced toward the studio where Lucas was teaching. This is the better investment. I couldn't help smiling. You're finally speaking my language. That afternoon, during our staff debrief, Zoe leaned over and whispered, you know what's wild? A year ago, he was the kind of guy who would have built a wall to keep us out. Now he's helping us build ramps. I looked toward Richard, who was laughing at something one of the volunteers had said. For the first time, it wasn't a formal, calculated smile, it was the kind of laugh that comes from being exactly where you want to be. The controversy came out of nowhere. One Monday morning, Zoe burst into my office, phone in hand. Have you seen this? She shoved the screen toward me. A headline glared back. Freedom steps under fire, critics claim program exploits disabled children for publicity. The article quoted a blogger who had attended one of our open houses. They'd taken photos, without permission, of children performing on the stage and twisted the story into something ugly. While the intentions may seem noble, the program parades disabled children in front of donors and media to tug at heartstrings and open wallets. My stomach turned. This is garbage. Doesn't matter, Zoe said grimly. It's spreading. By lunchtime, local TV stations had picked up the story. I started getting emails, some supportive, some accusing. Parents called, worried their children's privacy was at risk. Staff members were tense. The atmosphere in the center shifted, like a cloud had settled over everything we'd built. Richard arrived mid-afternoon, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, I've seen it, he said into the receiver. No, it's not accurate. And no, we're not making a statement until we know exactly how to respond. When he hung up, his eyes met mine. We have a choice, he said. We can go quiet and hope it dies down, or we can hit back hard. I crossed my arms. You mean you hit back hard? This kind of media storm could hurt you more than us. Maybe, he said, but you're not the one with a target on your back from people waiting for you to fail. The next day, a parent of one of our longtime students called a press conference, without telling us. She stood in front of the center with her son, speaking directly to the cameras. My child has gained more confidence here than anywhere else, she said, voice shaking with emotion. No one is parading him. No one is exploiting him. He is leading. And I'm proud the world gets to see that. The clip went viral. Richard called me that evening. That mother just did more for our reputation than any corporate PR team could have. Then maybe the story should be about the families, I said. 2 days later, we held our own press event, but it wasn't in a boardroom or staged on the center's new outdoor stage. It was inside the studio, during an actual class. Kids danced, laughed, and led their partners, exactly as they always did. Richard spoke briefly, standing beside Lucas. Freedom Steps doesn't put children on display, he said. It puts them in charge. And if anyone wants to call that exploitation, they can call me first. His words were picked up everywhere. The backlash began to fade. In its place came messages of support, from parents, from other organizations, even from strangers who'd seen the clips online. That night, after the last family had left, Richard lingered in the lobby. I wasn't sure I should speak out, he admitted. Part of me thought I should protect my own name first. But you didn't, I said. He shrugged, almost smiling. Turns out, my name's worth more if it's tied to the right things. The week after the controversy faded, I got a call I never expected. It was from the director of the National Pediatric Rehabilitation Council. She'd seen the coverage of the press event, Richard standing beside Lucas, the kids leading the class, and she wanted to nominate Freedom Steps for the council's annual Innovation Award. It's not just about the program, she said. It's about the model you've built, community-driven, child-led, and replicable nationwide. I thanked her, stunned, and hung up. Zoe, who'd been eavesdropping from the doorway, grinned like she'd been holding it in for years. We're going national, D. The nomination turned into something bigger. We were invited to present Freedom Steps at the Council's National Conference in Washington, D.C. The session wouldn't just be a speech, it would include a live demonstration with our kids. That's where the complication came in. D.C.? Richard said when I told him. That's a full week away. We'd have to coordinate travel, equipment, staff. And Lucas. Lucas was already at the end of the hall, overhearing every word. I want to go, he called back. Richard looked at me. I knew what he was thinking: media, travel stress, the risk of another public spotlight so soon after the last one. But Lucas's expression was the same one I'd seen the night he asked me to dance in front of a room full of strangers. Determination with no breaks. We decided to take a small team, me, Zoe, 2 instructors, 5 kids including Lucas, and Richard. The logistics were a nightmare, but by the time we arrived in D.C., the tension had turned into a buzz of excitement. The conference hall was massive, with tiered seating that seemed to rise forever. Representatives from hospitals, universities, and rehabilitation centers filled the room. Cameras lined the back wall. Before our slot, I peeked through the curtain. Lucas was pacing backstage, his cane tapping lightly on the floor. Richard stood beside him, one hand on his son's shoulder. You ready? Richard asked. Lucas took a deep breath. I'm leading, right? You're leading, his father confirmed. When our presentation began, I spoke for the first 10 minutes, explaining the philosophy behind Freedom Steps, the neuroscience, the data. Then I stepped aside, and the kids took the floor. Lucas led them in a simple routine, pairs moving in sync, each child adapting the steps to their own abilities. The audience leaned forward. This wasn't polished, choreographed perfection. It was messy, alive, real. When it ended, the applause was immediate and loud. People stood. Cameras flashed. Lucas grinned at me, then turned to his father. Richard wasn't clapping, he was watching his son with a look I'd only seen once before, the day Lucas took that first step without a brace. That night, in the hotel lobby after the awards dinner, yes, we won, Richard pulled me aside. They want to fund a pilot in 5 more cities, he said. Full implementation within 2 years. I felt a thrill and a weight at the same time. That's huge. It's more than huge, he said. It means traveling. A lot. And not just for you. I knew what he was saying. This expansion would change our lives. And it would mean taking Lucas into an even bigger spotlight. Before I could respond, Lucas came bounding over, the trophy in his hands. We did it. Richard looked at him, then at me, and for the first time, I saw hesitation, not about the program, but about letting go of the relative safety we'd found. The next morning, the hotel breakfast room was still buzzing with post-award chatter from the conference. Lucas sat at a table near the window, spinning the trophy slowly in his hands, his cane leaning against the chair. "You've been quiet," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He shrugged. "I've been thinking." "About what?" He glanced toward the buffet line, where Richard was pouring coffee. "If we go to all those other cities, it's going to be different. More cameras. More people watching. Does that bother you?" I asked. "A little," he admitted. "But it also feels important." I studied his face. He wasn't the same boy who'd once hesitated to lead a single step. There was confidence now, but also an awareness of what visibility could cost. When Richard returned with his coffee, Lucas asked him point-blank, "Are we going to do it?" Richard sat down slowly, like the weight of the question needed to be respected. "That depends. This isn't just my decision, it's yours too." Lucas tilted his head. "You mean I get a vote?" "You get more than a vote," Richard said. "You're the reason this exists." I watched the exchange in silence. The Richard I'd first met would never have shared decision-making power with anyone, let alone his son. This version was still learning, but he was learning out loud. Back in New York, the reality of the expansion hit fast. Meetings with potential partner cities, funding negotiations, media requests, it was like trying to steer a ship while the tide kept changing. One evening, I stayed late at the center, alone in the studio. I turned off the overhead lights and sat in the quiet, the moonlight spilling in through the high windows. I kept thinking about Lucas's question, "Are we going to do it?" and my own unspoken one, "Could we scale something so personal without losing its heart?" The next day, Richard came to my office with a proposal folder. "I've been thinking," he said, "if we do this, we keep the same rule we started with, local autonomy. Each city has to have someone like you at the helm. Someone who gets it, not just someone who can run it." I nodded slowly. "That's the only way it works." He hesitated. "There's another thing. If we take this leap, we're doing it as partners." "Partners in what sense?" I asked carefully. "In every sense that matters for this program," he said. "Funding, strategy, decisions. I'm not just backing it, I'm in it with you." I looked at him for a long moment. This wasn't the same man who had handed me a business card in a restaurant and expected me to fall in line. This was someone who'd been changed, by his son, by this place, maybe even by me. "All right," I said finally. "Partners." And as we shook on it, I realized the decision had already been made, not in a boardroom, not in a conference hall, but in the moment Lucas took that first step and we all learned what it meant to follow. The expansion began with a whirlwind of movement, contracts signed, teams recruited, community spaces scouted in 5 new cities. The Freedom Steps logo was suddenly appearing on banners in places I'd never been: Minneapolis, Atlanta, Denver, Seattle, and Dallas. From the outside, it looked like a flawless rollout. On the inside, I could feel the fault lines forming. In each city, local leaders were enthusiastic but under pressure to deliver results quickly. Some wanted to streamline the program, add uniform choreography, standardized class structures, even competitive elements. "That's not what we are," I told Richard in one of our late-night calls. "If we start forcing the same moves everywhere, we lose the heart of it." "I agree," he said, but his voice carried the weight of someone already calculating the cost of pushing back. "But some of these sponsors expect measurable outcomes. They want numbers they can show their donors." "We can give them numbers," I countered, "but they can't come at the expense of choice." The first real fracture came in Denver. Their newly appointed program director emailed me a proposal for a national showcase, in which all branches would perform the same routine. "It'll show unity," she wrote. "And it'll be easier to market." I stared at the email for a long time before forwarding it to Richard with 2 words: "Absolutely not." His reply was quick: I'll handle it. But when I got on the next call with the Denver sponsors, I realized handling it had meant smoothing it over, not shutting it down. They were already telling parents about the showcase. That night, I confronted him. "You went around me," I said. "I was trying to keep the peace," he replied. "If we alienate Denver sponsors, the whole branch could collapse before it starts. And if we betray what Freedom Step stands for, the whole thing collapses in every city," I shot back. The silence between us was sharper than any argument we'd had before. For a week, we barely spoke outside of formal meetings. Zoe noticed immediately. "You two need to fix this before the anniversary gala," she warned. "If you walk into that room divided, people will smell it." She was right. The gala wasn't just a fundraiser, it was the symbolic heartbeat of the program. And this year, all 5 new branches were sending representatives. 2 days before the event, I was in the studio alone when the door opened and Richard walked in. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "You were right. About Denver. About all of it." I crossed my arms. "Go on." "I thought protecting the expansion meant keeping the sponsors happy. But it's not their name on the door, it's the kids. If we lose their trust, nothing else matters." I let out a slow breath. "So what now?" "I told Denver the showcase idea is dead. And I told them why. They weren't happy, but they'll live." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension unclench. "Good. Then let's go into that gala with the same message we started with, your rhythm, your rules." He nodded. Together. The expansion rolled out like a wave, smooth on the surface, churning underneath. Within 6 months, Freedom Steps banners were hanging in community centers in Minneapolis, Atlanta, Denver, Seattle, and Dallas. The website was flooded with new parent inquiries. News outlets called it a national movement. But behind the headlines, I could feel the strain. Every city wanted to leave its mark, but some directors were already pushing for changes I knew would cut at the heart of what we were. One email from Denver's branch hit me like a slap. Proposal: all branches participate in a national showcase with the same choreography. This will improve marketing, unity, and donor confidence. Unity. Donor confidence. I read those words twice, then forwarded the email to Richard with one comment: "We are not a uniformed performance team." He replied within minutes, "I'll handle it." But the next week, I heard from Denver parents that their kids were already rehearsing for the big national routine. My stomach sank. When I called Richard, his tone was measured, too measured. I told them to slow down, but I didn't shut it down entirely. Denver's sponsors are particular. We need to keep them on board. Even if it means betraying what Freedom Steps is about. I asked. He hesitated. "We can make a small compromise." "No," I cut in. "There's no halfway on this. Either the kids lead, or they don't." The air between us chilled. For the first time since we'd become partners, we were on opposite sides of a line. Meetings became stiff. Calls ended quickly. Zoe noticed immediately. "You two need to figure this out before the anniversary gala," she warned. "If you walk into that room divided, you'll sink the whole thing." She was right. This gala wasn't just another fundraiser. It was the public face of our success, a night where every branch would send representatives, donors would be watching, and the media would be waiting to see if Freedom Steps really was what it claimed to be. 2 nights before the event, I stayed late at the Manhattan Center, alone in the dim studio. The lights from the street painted long rectangles across the floor. I was replaying the Denver conversation in my head when I heard the door open. Richard walked in, no jacket, sleeves rolled up. He didn't speak right away. "I told Denver the showcase idea is dead," he said finally. "And I told them why. They weren't happy, but they'll adapt." I studied him. What changed your mind? He gave a small, almost sheepish smile. Lucas. He asked me if the new branches would get to choose their own dances like he did. I couldn't look him in the eye and say no. For the first time in weeks, the tension between us eased. Then we're walking into that gala with one message, I said. He nodded. Your rhythm. Your rules. Every move counts. The anniversary gala shimmered in gold and warm light. The main hall of the Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center transformed into something out of a dream. The walls were lined with photos, then and now portraits of children from their first days at the program to the strides they'd made over months and years. The stage had been dressed simply, the Freedom Steps banner hanging high above it, its motto painted bold, your rhythm. Your rules. Every move counts. Families filled the tables, mingling with donors, community leaders, and the directors from our new branches. The buzz of conversation carried the mix of excitement and pride I'd been hoping for. It was a night to celebrate how far we'd come, and, if we did it right, to remind everyone why we existed in the first place. When Richard arrived with Lucas, the room shifted. Not because he was the billionaire benefactor, though that was how many still thought of him, but because he'd become part of this place. He shook hands, greeted parents by name, even crouched down to talk to kids at their level. Lucas, now moving with a light brace and no cane, drifted easily between groups, introducing himself to children from the new branches as if they were already friends. As the program began, I took the stage to welcome everyone. My voice was steady, but my chest was full. I spoke about the journey from a single cramped studio to a network of centers in 5 cities. I talked about our core belief, that giving a child control over their own movement changes everything, inside and out. Then I stepped aside for the main performance. Instead of the polished, uniform routine some sponsors might have expected, we had chosen something radical, a completely improvised circle led by kids from all branches. No script, no choreography. One child at a time stepped into the center, made a move, and the rest followed in their own way, wheelchairs spinning, crutches tapping, braces stepping, feet skipping. It was chaotic, joyful, alive. When Lucas's turn came, he paused in the center, scanning the crowd. Then he did something none of us had planned. He walked over to Richard, held out his hand, and said, "Come dance with me." The room held its breath. For a moment, Richard froze. The man who once lived by control, who had spent years keeping emotion locked behind a polished exterior, now stood in front of a room full of cameras, his son's hand waiting. Slowly, he stood, stepped onto the floor, and let Lucas lead him. The applause began quietly, then swelled until it filled the hall. Cameras flashed, but Richard didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on his son, matching his pace, letting him decide where they went. When they finished, Richard turned to the crowd. A year ago, I didn't understand what it meant to follow. My son taught me. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure every child here gets the chance to lead. The room erupted. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears. Later, after the speeches and the final dance, I found Richard by the photo wall. He was looking at the first picture we'd ever taken of Lucas at the center, braces heavy on both legs, eyes cautious but curious. "You know," he said quietly, "this place changed him." "It changed you, too," I replied. He smiled, not the practiced billionaire smile, but something warmer, unguarded. "And it changed us." That night, as the last guests left and the lights dimmed, I stood in the empty hall and thought about the journey, from a single dance in a restaurant to a movement stretching across cities. The work wasn't finished, it never would be. But we had built something real, something that could outlast us. And as long as there were children ready to take that first step, there would be someone here ready to follow. This is more than a story about a billionaire and a waitress. It's about what happens when we stop leading from above and start following the people we claim to support. As Richard Montgomery learned, true leadership isn't about control, it's about creating space for others to lead. Your rhythm. Your rules. Every move counts. If this story moved you, don't just watch, be part of the change. Share it, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to True Echo for more powerful stories that prove the smallest steps can spark the biggest revolutions.